My grandmother used me and my cousins as family assets for decades, so I exposed her secret and destroyed her lives with a move she never saw coming. Growing up, my family only had one source of income, renting us out. My grandparents started the rental system in 1987. They noticed how sexually frustrated their male relatives were, how their marriages crumbled during dry spells. So they created what I now like to joke as being the modern solution. One child, specifically a daughter, would be loaned to relatives who needed therapeutic refreshers. The chosen child wore a GPS tracker bracelet that couldn't be removed. My mother was one of the first to volunteer. Her dad, my granddad, had preached to her since she was a newborn about the woman's purpose in the family, how it was up to us to put the men at ease by using what our mama gave us. She genuinely believed she was helping the family, preventing divorces, stopping relatives from turning violence on each other, all the traits of a real woman. It actually sounds crazy saying it out loud, but for so long, this is just the way things were. 3 generations of our family had grown up seeing this as normal. My aunts would bring their husbands to preview sessions, teaching them which acts were most accessible, and more importantly, most pleasurable for the male. By the time men married into our family, they had their own access schedules. The women weren't innocent bystanders either. My grandmother maintained the booking calendar. My mother coordinated transportation. My aunts prepared aftercare kits and taught younger girls that this was keeping the family strong. They believed it. Without the program, they'd say, imagine how many divorces we'd have. I was 6 when I first watched my cousin Priya get loaded into Uncle Devang's car. I watched his parents count the cash payment while explaining Priya's trigger points like they were handing over a manual. The rules were specific. Children served from age 4 until 18. Then the next youngest would be selected. No gaps in coverage allowed. My grandmother kept detailed spreadsheets. Which child served which family, satisfaction ratings, injury logs labeled as maintenance records. She showed me once, proud of the organization, client testimonials praising how much their marriages had improved, payment histories showing our family's financial stability. And since I grew up as the ugly duckling of the family, double chin, huge nose, small eyes, by the time I turned 10, I still hadn't been picked. But everything changed when I turned 13 and found my granny's old laptop. It was hidden beneath a stack of towels, so I knew there had to be something juicy she was hiding. The password was easy, my birthday, since I was her future breadwinner. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, I just knew I was bored. But after just 20 minutes, I found it. Dozens of videos of encrypted client videos, 20 years of footage. Every session was recorded for quality assurance. I even found black and white photos of my mother as a preteen, when her eyes were still filled with childhood innocence. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized how effed up our family really was. Something about watching my uncles learning techniques on their cousins finally opened my eyes. Generations of systematic violence, all carefully archived. And if I was anywhere other than my hometown, I would have ran straight to the police. But in my small town, over 80% of the officers consisted of my family members, ones who featured in the videos I had found. And I knew turning the videos meant putting my life in danger. So for a while, I had no idea what to do. I was sort of hoping that the problem would just go away by itself. And one day, it did. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I saw my cousin Madhu putting on a sari that barely covered her body, the sign that she was chosen. I asked her if she wanted to exercise before leaving, and she nodded. No listening ears, no home prison, just us pouring our hearts out. It was the first time we were able to talk about what was going on. She was in tears. This is my 3rd family. The other 2 rejected me for being too injured. She was hyperventilating, and that's when we heard it. Her dad shouting that it was time to go. I didn't get to save her, but that's how it started. Every weekend, while the men had fun with their assigned girls, me and the unchosen ones would gather together in the shed, all desperate to avoid our fate. I taught them how to recall detailed accounts of abuse, which might not sound like much, but for most of us it was everything. We had spent so long being struck into silence that it took us weeks of practice to speak about what was going on. But slowly, we found our voices. Everything crashed down at my cousin Sunita's 16th birthday. Grandmother stood with the GPS bracelet, announcing Sunita would go to the highest bidder. Suddenly, all the men broke out into applause for Mr. Sharma, who'd paid in advance. She was so young she hadn't even started puberty yet. Something in me snapped. As he started the final vow, I stood up and spoke. But this time it wasn't in the shed. It was out loud. This isn't right. She deserves a childhood. People's jaws dropped. The men clenched their fists in anger. Through the window, I could see men in suits surrounding us. Someone had called them about a marriage in progress. The door burst open and 3 CPS workers rushed inside, their badges gleaming as they moved through the crowd. Behind them, 2 police officers scanned the room while grandmother's fingers flew across her phone screen, deleting messages with practiced speed. I grabbed Sunita's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen, gathering my younger cousins around me like a shield. The lead social worker, a woman with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped forward during what should have been the cake cutting. She looked directly at Sunita, then at Mr. Sharma, who was already backing toward the wall, his wedding ring catching the light as he raised his hands defensively. He stammered something about being just a family friend, just here for the party, nothing more. The words erupted from me before I could stop them. I pointed at grandmother and the accusation tore through the celebration like lightning. She sells us. The room erupted in nervous laughter, relatives shaking their heads at my teenage dramatics, until the officer's voice cut through the noise. He announced they had Madhu's statement from the hospital. Grandmother's face went pale. She turned to Aunt Priya, speaking rapidly in Tamil, gesturing wildly. Priya stood frozen between them, her hand unconsciously touching the insulin pump at her waist, the one grandmother's money paid for. The social worker asked Priya to translate, and I watched my aunt's mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. My mind raced. The laptop was still hidden in my room, filled with evidence that could destroy everything, but mentioning it now might give grandmother time to have someone destroy it. I noticed her hand shaking as she gripped her phone, her knuckles white with tension. Sunita started crying, her small body trembling against mine. I wrapped my arms around her, whispering reassurances, not noticing grandmother typing furiously until I caught a glimpse of her screen. Clean the house now. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. Everything exploded at once. The social worker explained that Madhu was at the hospital, that police needed statements from everyone, and just then my mother's sister burst through the door demanding to know where her cut was. She'd driven 3 hours after hearing about the party, expecting her usual payment. I held my 9-year-old cousin tighter as she sobbed into my shirt. Without thinking, I mentioned that there were other girls, that this wasn't just about Sunita. A family friend near the door immediately turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the driveway. Grandmother clutched her chest, gasping for air. The performance looked real enough that the officer called for an ambulance, buying her the sympathy she needed. Relatives rushed to her side while I stood there holding crying children, looking like the villain who'd given an old woman a heart attack. My 12-year-old cousin Mira tugged on my sleeve, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. She whispered that grandma had promised she'd get to help with special work soon, that she'd earn money for the family like the older girls. The social worker overheard and her face hardened. During the commotion, the officer noticed fresh bruises on Alicia's arms, purple fingerprints that wrapped around her thin limbs. He asked to photograph them but said he'd need a warrant first. The bruises matched exactly what Madhu had described to the hospital staff. The CPS workers decided to remove us immediately. As they led me to their car, neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering behind their hands. I heard fragments of their conversations, about that troubled girl causing drama again, about how I'd always been jealous of my prettier cousins. The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and fear. Madhu lay unconscious, machines beeping around her. The doctor explained they needed grandmother's consent for a RP kit, but she was already there with her lawyer. lawyer, insisting it would cause unnecessary trauma to a sick girl. Her performance was flawless, the concerned grandmother protecting her granddaughter from further violation. The lawyer, a man in an expensive suit, already had a folder about me. He showed the social worker my high school records, the counselor's notes about self-harm, the scars on my arms that I'd hidden for years. He used words like attention-seeking behavior and unstable personality, painting me as a disturbed teenager lashing out at a loving family. My phone buzzed constantly. The family group chat exploded with old photos, carefully selected to show me looking sullen at birthday parties while my cousins opened expensive gifts. They shared screenshots of times I'd complained about unfair treatment, twisting teenage frustration into evidence of jealousy and resentment. I tried reaching out to distant relatives on Facebook, desperate for someone to believe me. But grandmother was faster. Those messages were screenshot and shared as evidence of my harassment campaign against an elderly woman who'd done nothing but love her grandchildren. Then I discovered the worst part. Grandmother still paid my phone bill. She could see every call I made to CPS, every text to the detective. When she called that evening, her voice was sweet as honey. She asked why I was making so many calls, Beta, why I was trying so hard to hurt the family. After 48 hours without sleep, sitting in interview rooms and repeating my story, the details started blurring together. I confused which uncle had visited when, mixed up dates and times. The detective's expression grew more skeptical with each mistake. I looked unreliable, unstable, exactly how grandmother wanted me to appear. My best friend's mother called to say they couldn't see me anymore. Grandmother had called them crying, explaining how I was making false accusations, how I'd always been troubled. My friend texted me secretly later, saying her mom believed grandmother, not me. The first crack in my outside support system. The town began dividing. At the grocery store, one cashier refused to ring up my items, turning her back when I approached her lane. But another customer slipped a $20 bill into my hand as I left, whispering for me to stay strong. Small acts of kindness amid an ocean of judgment. Grandmother's lawyer presented evidence that she'd helped with college tuition for several family members. Technically true, she had paid for Priya's nursing classes. They painted her as a generous matriarch supporting her family's education, not a woman selling children for profit. My chemistry teacher needed grandmother's famous samosa recipe for the school fundraiser. She approached me carefully, trying to stay neutral while making it clear she couldn't take sides. The whole town was watching, choosing their positions in this family war. The laptop password investigation revealed something that made my skin crawl. Grandmother had used my birthday because she genuinely saw me as special, the one granddaughter smart enough to continue the family business. Her twisted affection made everything worse, showing she'd been grooming me for management, not service. Someone photographed me smiling at a coffee shop while getting my morning caffeine. Within hours, the image spread online with captions about how I could laugh while Madhu lay dying in the hospital. They didn't know I'd been awake for 3 days, that the smile was exhaustion making me delirious. Grandmother's final text that week was simple but chilling. You've killed me. The words stared at me from my phone screen as I realized this would only end with someone in jail or someone in the ground. I stared at those 3 words on my phone screen until my vision blurred. My hands trembled as I set the device aside and focused on survival. The next morning brought Uncle Vikram to my workplace, his arm wrapped around my newest coworker McCatherine. She giggled at his jokes while he positioned himself perfectly to watch my every move behind the coffee counter. He ordered slowly, asking McCatherine about the staff schedules, mentioning how I seemed stressed lately. My manager noticed the tension and pulled me aside, suggesting I take a break. Grandmother's next move came through the detective assigned to our case. He called me in for another interview, this time focusing on my mental state. He'd received reports that I'd been obsessed with being chosen for the family business, that I felt rejected when prettier cousins were selected instead. The accusation hit like a physical blow. I tried explaining the truth, but my words tangled together, exhaustion making me stumble over basic facts. My old journal became their weapon. Grandmother's lawyer had somehow obtained entries from when I was 14, pages where I'd written about feeling left out, wondering why Priya got everything. Normal teenage jealousy twisted into evidence of a disturbed mind seeking revenge. The lawyer read my own words back to me, each sentence recontextualized as proof of my supposed vendetta. Meanwhile, my 8-year-old cousin had started telling her teacher about grandma's promises. The little girl excitedly explained how she'd soon help the family earn money, just like the big girls did. The teacher's face went white. Another call to CPS, another investigation opened, but grandmother was ready. She arrived at the school with cookies and tears, explaining how I'd been filling the children's heads with terrible ideas. The security footage from our neighbor's house became crucial evidence, though not in the way I'd hoped. The cameras showed young girls entering grandmother's house regularly, but without audio, it simply looked like family visits. No signs of distress visible from the street, no evidence of anything beyond a loving grandmother hosting her grandchildren. The prosecutor reviewed the tapes and shook his head. Family court arrived faster than expected. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, questioned why I'd waited so long to make accusations. Why now, after years of supposed abuse? I tried explaining about finding the laptop, about finally understanding what was happening, but my timeline had holes. Stress had scrambled my memories. Dates didn't line up perfectly. The judge's expression grew increasingly skeptical. That evening, I discovered something that made my stomach turn. Using my mother's old Amazon account, I searched grandmother's purchase history. Hidden among household items were orders for lingerie in children's sizes. The descriptions made me nauseous. Special occasion wear, for petite frames. Each order corresponded with dates from her booking calendar. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking. Grandmother's Venmo account told another story. Payments from uncle friends with emoji-filled descriptions that seemed innocent to outsiders. Birthday cake emojis, heart symbols, celebration icons. But the amounts and timing matched the old records perfectly. 500 here, 300 there, always the day after a child had visited. I documented every transaction, building my own spreadsheet of evidence. My teenage therapy notes became their next tool against me. Sessions where I talked about feeling unsafe at home, about wanting to run away, were presented as typical teenage angst. The therapist had written adjustment disorder and mild depression, never suspecting the real cause. Now those clinical terms were used to paint me as mentally unstable, prone to false memories and persecution complexes. I attempted to record grandmother during a family gathering, hiding my phone in my pocket, but she spotted the device immediately. Her scream pierced the air as she clutched her chest, wailing about her ungrateful granddaughter trying to entrap her. Relatives rushed to comfort her while glaring at me with disgust. The recording captured only her cries of betrayal, nothing incriminating. Work became impossible. Court dates and emergency hearings meant missed shifts. My manager finally pulled me aside, explaining that the drama was affecting business. Customers had complained about the family controversy. He handed me my final paycheck with apologetic eyes. Another source of stability gone. Another victory for grandmother's campaign. The hardest blow came from Madhu's mother. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, she explained her impossible position. Grandmother paid for Madhu's specialized medical care. The experimental treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Without that money, her daughter might die. She looked at me with hollow eyes and made her choice. She would support whatever story grandmother told. I noticed grandmother wearing my mother's wedding jewelry at the next family gathering. The gold necklace that was supposed to be mine gleamed against her sari. When I confronted her, she smiled sadly and explained explained that my mother had given it to her before she died, a gift of gratitude for all the support over the years. Relatives nodded, remembering how close they'd been. The offer came through my father. Grandmother would forgive everything if I simply recanted my story. Admit I'd been confused, traumatized by my mother's death, lashing out at the family who loved me. She'd even pay for therapy, help me get back on my feet. All I had to do was tell the police I'd made a mistake. My father delivered the message with tears in his eyes, begging me to consider it. My refusal fractured the family further. Aunts who'd been neutral now saw me as choosing revenge over healing. They whispered about my selfishness, how I was destroying the family from within. Even cousins who'd suffered alongside me began to distance themselves, afraid of being associated with the troublemaker who wouldn't let things go. Then came the revelation about Uncle Raj. I'd always assumed he was part of the system, another user, but hidden in my mother's old files, I found evidence of his payments to grandmother, not for access to children, but bribes attempting to get specific girls removed from the program. He'd been trying to save them, working within the twisted system to protect who he could. My assumptions had been wrong. The voicemails changed everything. My father led me to the garage one evening, pulling out an old flip phone hidden behind paint cans. My mother's voice filled the dusty space, shaky but determined. Message after message of her negotiating with grandmother, trying to find a way to end the program without destroying the family. She'd been fighting from within, documenting everything, building her own case. The last message was dated 3 days before her OD. Her diary confirmed what the voicemail suggested. Page after page of careful documentation, plans to approach authorities, evidence she'd gathered over years, but also her growing despair as she realized how deep the corruption ran, how many officials were involved. The final entry was a goodbye, acknowledging she couldn't win this fight but hoping someone else might. My father faced an impossible choice. His dialysis treatments cost more than Medicare covered. Grandmother supplemented the expenses, keeping him alive. Supporting me meant losing that help, potentially dying. He made his decision publicly, standing with grandmother at family events, but privately, he slipped me more evidence, photographs my mother had hidden, names of potential allies. I began stalking grandmother's doctor, learning his routines, engineering casual encounters. Slowly, I built rapport, mentioning my concern for my elderly grandmother's health. He revealed more than he should have, prescription patterns that didn't match her claimed conditions, anxiety medications and doses that suggested distribution, not personal use, pain pills that no elderly woman should need in such quantities. Mr. Sharma's daughter became my next target. I orchestrated an accidental meeting at the mall, striking up conversation about school. She was bright, talkative, eager for attention. Within minutes, she was telling me about her father's special friends, the pretty girls who visited when mommy wasn't home. Her innocent words confirmed what I'd suspected. The abuse extended beyond our family. Grandmother's Facebook provided a goldmine before she made it private. I screenshot everything. Photos from family gatherings where young girls sat on older men's laps, comments that seemed innocent but carried dark undertones, check-ins at hotels that matched dates from her calendar. The digital trail was extensive once you knew what to look for. My mother's AA sponsor appeared like a vulture, claiming my mother had confessed everything during recovery meetings. She wanted money for her silence, threatening to go to grandmother with tales of my mother's final plans. I spent precious resources keeping her quiet, money I couldn't afford to lose. Each payment felt like betrayal of my mother's memory. The cost of fighting back multiplied. I missed Alicia's school play while dealing with the blackmailer. She'd needed me there, one stable adult in her chaotic life. Instead, she performed to an audience of enablers and abusers. When I tried to apologize later, she wouldn't make eye contact. Another relationship sacrificed to this war. Legal fees drained my credit cards. The lawyer explained that cases like this required extensive documentation, expert witnesses, psychological evaluations. Each meeting cost hundreds I didn't have. Meanwhile, grandmother used the rental income to fund her defense, hiring the best attorneys money could buy. The financial imbalance felt insurmountable. My confrontation at Madhu's hospital room went badly. Raised voices disturbed other patients. Nurses called security. I found myself escorted out while grandmother remained, the concerned relative at her granddaughter's bedside. The medical staff saw her as the stable family member, me as the disruptive influence. Another public relations victory for her campaign. Losing my retail job meant scrambling for income. Applications went nowhere once employers Googled my name. The family controversy had made me unemployable in our small town. I picked up odd jobs, cleaning houses, anything that paid cash. But court dates interfered with even these irregular schedules. Managers grew tired of my absences, my exhaustion, my drama. Homelessness loomed until a friend offered her basement. I slept on a moldy mattress while grandmother hosted family dinners in my childhood home. She cooked in the kitchen where I'd first found courage to speak out, served meals in the dining room where we'd planned resistance. The irony burned like acid in my throat. My mother's sister, one of the few relatives who'd shown kindness, begged me to reconsider. She sat beside me on a park bench, tears streaming down her face, reminding me that my mother wouldn't want this. The family destruction, the public shame, the children caught in crossfire. Her words carried weight because she'd loved my mother too, understood the cost of this fight. The investigation's ripple effects spread beyond our family. Alicia's teacher, a mandatory reporter, struggled with guilt over missing signs. The stress affected her pregnancy. She developed complications requiring bed rest. Her husband blamed her for not protecting students, for being too trusting. Their marriage counseling sessions became another casualty of our family's poison. I watched the teacher's marriage crumble and questioned my choices. Was exposing the truth worth destroying innocent lives? But then I'd remember Sunita's tears, Madhu's bruises, the generations of girls sacrificed to maintain family harmony. The investigation had to continue, regardless of collateral damage. My only supportive cousin asked the question that haunted me. What if grandmother genuinely believed she was helping? What if, in her twisted worldview, this system had saved the family from poverty and dissolution? The question left me speechless because I'd seen the pride in her eyes when showing me the spreadsheets. She truly thought she'd created something beneficial. Establishing credibility meant admitting my own crimes. I confessed to stealing money from grandmother when I was 15, desperate to buy school supplies she deemed unnecessary. The admission felt like swallowing glass, but it established a pattern of truth-telling that the prosecutor said might help. Every revelation stripped away another piece of my dignity. Hospital records revealed a damning detail. I'd brought Madhu to the emergency room after her worst assault, but left before answering questions. Fear had driven me away. Terror of confronting the system. Now that abandonment was used against me. If I truly cared, why hadn't I stayed? Why hadn't I reported it then? My cowardice became evidence of fabrication. Grandmother's lawyer filed motions to expedite proceedings while my key witness was conveniently absent. Priya had suddenly needed to visit India for a family emergency. Her ticket purchased by grandmother. The timing was too perfect, removing the one cousin who might have corroborated my story. Without her testimony, my case weakened significantly. The generational pattern emerged through research. Grandmother's own childhood in poverty-stricken India included similar arrangements. Her mother had made comparable choices, trading daughter's innocence for family survival. The cycle stretched back generations, each woman believing she was protecting her family through sacrifice. Understanding didn't excuse it, but it explained the depth of her conviction. My grandfather's deathbed became another battlefield. He was fading fast, cancer eating away at his body. I needed his confession, his acknowledgement of what they'd built together. But recording a dying man felt monstrous. I sat beside his hospital bed with my phone hidden, listening to his labored breathing, watching tears roll down his wrinkled cheeks. His whispered admissions broke my heart even as I documented them. The person I'd been before, trusting, optimistic, believing in family bonds, died during those months. I learned to manipulate conversations, extract information through calculated emotional appeals, I became someone who could smile while planning the next strategic move. The investigation hadn't just exposed our family's darkness, it had transformed me into someone capable of navigating it. Mr. Sharma's daughter provided crucial evidence during a babysitting session. While she played with dolls, I scrolled through her tablet, finding texts between her parents discussing custody arrangements. Her mother's messages revealed knowledge of the visits, the special friends, the reasons for divorce. I screenshot everything, hating myself for violating a child's privacy, but knowing these messages could save others. Small victories felt hollow against larger losses. Proving one financial transaction matched a documented visit meant nothing when grandmother collapsed at home. I performed CPR on the woman I was trying to imprison, pumping life back into the chest that had orchestrated so much pain. Relatives found us like that, me saving her while simultaneously trying to destroy her. The optics were devastating. Grandmother's recovery room became a stage for her final performance. She told visitors I'd orchestrated everything for attention, that my jealousy had driven me to create elaborate false memories. Relatives who'd wavered in their support now rallied around her hospital bed. The grandmother who'd saved my life became proof of my ingratitude, my cruelty, my delusion. Everything hinged on Madhu waking up. The doctors had induced a coma to help her heal, but her testimony would make or break the case. I spent hours in the hospital chapel, praying to gods I'd stopped believing in, begging for her recovery and her memory. Without her voice, everything else was circumstantial. The other girls were too young or too scared to testify effectively. I started tutoring my younger cousin in mathematics, one of the few family connections I maintained. His struggles with algebra became leverage when his parents reminded me how I'd helped him pass, how I'd been part of his success. Why would I destroy his grandmother, his family's stability, his future? The emotional manipulation was masterful, using my love for the children against me. The local detective believed my story but explained the prosecutorial challenges. Grooming cases required victim cooperation. When families closed ranks, when victims were taught to see abuse as love, convictions became nearly impossible. He'd seen it before. Entire families protecting predators because the alternative meant destruction. His weary eyes reflected years of similar failures. A reporter who'd covered comparable cases met me in a diner outside town. She listened to my story with practiced neutrality, taking notes without judgment. Her article would be carefully worded, protecting identities while exposing patterns, but without concrete proof, without named sources. It would be just another vague warning about family secrets. The system protected itself through silence. The published article confirmed my worst fears. Similar cases across the country ended without convictions when families united against accusers. Grandmothers, grandfathers, trusted relatives who'd built elaborate systems of abuse, all protected by family loyalty and financial dependence. The reporter included statistics that made me nauseous. We weren't unique, we were typical. My mother's death took on new meaning as prescription levels were re-examined. The OD that had seemed accidental now looked deliberate. Therapeutic levels of anxiety medication, mixed with carefully calculated amounts of pain pills. She'd known exactly what she was doing. The medical examiner revised his report, noting the suspicious precision of the substance combination. Evidence of my mother's investigation surfaced in her abandoned car. Hidden beneath the spare tire were photographs she'd taken over years. Images of girls being prepared, dressed in adult clothing, makeup applied to child faces. One photo showed me at 10, lipstick smeared across my mouth, wearing a dress that exposed too much skin. I didn't remember the moment, had blocked it out, but the camera had captured everything. A sewer slide note emerged from the envelope of photographs. My mother's handwriting, shaky but clear, explaining her failure to stop the cycle. She'd tried everything. Documentation, negotiation, threats of exposure, but the system was too entrenched, the participants too numerous, the financial incentives too strong. Her death was her final protest, hoping someone would continue the fight. I committed to finishing what she'd started, regardless of personal cost. The investigation would continue even if it meant losing everything. My mother had died believing change was impossible. I would prove her wrong, even if victory looked like mutual destruction. Some families deserved to burn. Grandmother's deposition contained provable lies. She claimed never to have taken money directly, insisting all payments went through intermediaries. But the Venmo screenshots showed otherwise. Direct transfers with her name, her account, her bank. The prosecutor's eyes lit up as he reviewed the evidence. Financial crimes were easier to prove than abuse. I presented the financial pattern in court without emotion, reading numbers like grocery lists. Each transaction corresponded to a child's visit. Each payment matched the old calendar entries. The judge's expression shifted from skepticism to concern as the pattern emerged. Money told the story that testimonies couldn't. Mathematics didn't lie or forget or get confused under pressure. Grandmother's mouth moved silently as I spoke, forming words I couldn't hear. From across the courtroom, it looked like an apology, or maybe a curse. Her hands clutched rosary beads while mine unconsciously rubbed the scars on my arms. We'd both been marked by this system, just in different ways. The cycle had damaged everyone it touched. The detective presented his timeline showing escalation over the years. What had started as brief visits had evolved into overnight stays. Hospital records showed increasing injuries. Emergency room visits that corresponded with booking dates. The clinical presentation of data stripped away emotional arguments, leaving only facts. Children had been hurt, money had changed hands, patterns existed that couldn't be explained away. Mr. Sharma's ex-wife agreed to testify about finding inappropriate photographs on his computer. Her voice shook as she described protecting her daughter, filing for divorce, fighting for sole custody. She'd known about the family business but had stayed silent until it threatened her own child. Her testimony carried weight because she'd been complicit before choosing protection. The judge ordered psychological evaluations for all minor cousins still in the home. Social workers would interview each child, assess their understanding of appropriate boundaries, determine therapeutic needs. The order felt like victory, even as I knew the evaluations would traumatize already damaged children. Progress required pain. Healing demanded exposure. Text messages between family members were authenticated and entered into evidence. Conversations about payment rates, availability schedules, preferences for specific children. The casual nature of the discussions chilled the courtroom. They texted about selling children like planning dinner parties. The banality of evil documented in emoji and abbreviations. Evidence of grandmother's twisted love emerged through gift receipts. After each visit, she'd buy the affected child presents. Dolls for the youngest, electronics for teenagers, always with cards calling them special. The prosecution argued this showed consciousness of guilt, attempts to buy silence and compliance. The defense claimed it showed a loving grandmother spoiling her grandchildren. Grandmother's breakdown on the stand seemed genuine. She sobbed about saving the family from starvation, about her own mother's choices in India, about tradition and survival and sacrifice. Her tears were real even if her justification was warped. She truly believed she'd protected the family through systematic abuse. The conviction in her voice made several jurors shift uncomfortably. I was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. Standing before the court, I spoke about generational trauma, about cycles that needed breaking regardless of cost. I asked for prison time but also mental health treatment. Grandmother was criminal and victim both. The system she'd perpetuated had started with her own childhood. Justice required accountability and compassion equally. Temporary custody arrangements removed the youngest cousins from the home. They would stay in state care while relatives were evaluated. I was approved as a visitor, allowed supervised time with the children I'd tried to protect. The victory felt partial, incomplete. We'd saved some while losing others. The family had shattered exactly as grandmother had warned. Extended family divided into factions. Half believed my accusations, supporting the investigation despite personal cost. The other half branded me a family destroyer, a jealous girl who'd invented memories for attention. Cousins faced choosing sides at school, in the community, at temple. The warfare spread beyond our immediate family, poisoning an entire network of relationships. I started therapy alongside the rescued cousins, group sessions where we learned to speak truth without shame. 2 jobs barely covered legal fees and living expenses. Some relatives served time while others cut contact completely. The family business had ended, but its destruction left casualties everywhere. We were free and broken simultaneously. Restraining orders became necessary as threats escalated. Uncles who'd lost access made their anger known. Aunts who'd lost income blamed me for their poverty. The protection felt thin against generations of rage. I varied my routes, checked locks obsessively, startled at unexpected sounds. Freedom came with perpetual fear. Madhu's eyes finally fluttered open as autumn arrived. Her memory was fragmented, confused, but present. She remembered enough. Her testimony would seal convictions, validate everything I'd sacrificed to expose. But watching her struggle to speak, seeing the damage reflected in her vacant stare, I wondered if victory was the right word for any of this. The courtroom felt smaller with each passing day. I watched jurors scribble notes during testimony, their faces revealing nothing. The prosecutor methodically presented financial records while I sat rigid in my seat, hands folded to hide their trembling. Each document projected on the screen represented a child's visit, a payment received, a life altered. The defense attorney attempted to discredit the evidence, suggesting the transactions were innocent family support, but the patterns were too consistent to ignore. My cousin's psychological evaluations arrived sealed in manila envelopes. The social worker explained the findings in clinical terms that sanitized the horror: delayed emotional development, inappropriate boundary understanding, trauma responses masked as compliance. Each report strengthened the prosecution's case while breaking my heart. These children I'd tried to protect were professionally documented as damaged goods. Grandmother's medical records subpoenaed from her doctor revealed the prescription fraud. Anxiety medications prescribed in quantities suggesting distribution, not personal use. The prosecutor traced med counts against pharmacy records, building a secondary case for substance trafficking. Her lawyer argued she'd been sharing medications with family members who couldn't afford healthcare, painting her as a compassionate elder helping struggling relatives. The judge called a recess when Madhu took the stand. Her voice barely reached the microphone as she recounted fragmented memories. The defense attorney's cross-examination felt like watching someone kick a wounded animal. He questioned her recollection, highlighted inconsistencies, suggested her injuries came from elsewhere. I gripped the bench until my knuckles went white, fighting the urge to intervene. Uncle Vikram's arrest happened during lunch break. Officers escorted him from the courthouse in handcuffs after McCatherine provided her statement about his attempts to gather information on me. She'd recorded their conversations, documented his questions about my schedule and mental state. The conspiracy to intimidate a witness charge would stick even if nothing else did. My father's testimony surprised everyone. He took the stand despite knowing it would cost him grandmother's financial support for his dialysis. His voice steady, he confirmed finding my mother's evidence, validated her investigation attempts, admitted his own cowardice in staying silent. The courtroom went silent when he revealed grandmother had threatened to withhold his medical funds if he supported me. The forensic accountant's presentation lasted 3 hours. Charts and graphs transformed our family's horror into digestible data points. Income streams from various uncles, payment schedules correlating with school holidays, escalating prices as children aged. The clinical presentation somehow made it worse, reducing human suffering to profit margins and market rates. Priya returned from India 2 days before closing arguments. Her appearance in court caused a stir. She'd lost weight, dark circles shadowed her eyes. She took the stand and systematically dismantled grandmother's defense. Her nursing training gave her testimony medical credibility as she described treating cousins' injuries, documenting abuse patterns, being threatened into silence. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the money trail. Follow the payments, follow the victims, follow the pattern spanning 3 generations. The defense countered with cultural explanations, poverty justifications, attacking my credibility as a jealous granddaughter seeking attention. They painted grandmother as a confused elder manipulated by a vindictive teenager. Jury deliberation stretched into its 3rd day when Mr. Sharma changed his plea. His lawyer negotiated a deal, guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony about the broader network. His statement implicated 4 other families, expanding the investigation beyond our immediate relatives. The prosecutor's office assigned additional investigators to follow these new leads. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on 15 counts of child endangerment. Guilty on 3 counts of human trafficking. Guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud. Not guilty on the more severe charges that would have meant life imprisonment. Grandmother collapsed at the defense table, this time genuinely, requiring medical attention. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. 8 years in state prison with possibility of parole in 5. The judge cited her age, health conditions, and own childhood trauma as mitigating factors. Mr. Sharma received 3 years for related charges. Uncle Vikram got 18 months for witness intimidation. Other relatives accepted plea deals for probation and mandatory counseling. The youngest cousin's custody hearings proceeded separately. 3 entered foster care when no suitable relatives could pass background checks. 2 others went to distant family members who'd been unaware of the business. I received approved visitor status for all 5, allowed supervised meetings twice monthly. The state would monitor their progress, provide therapy, attempt to break the cycle. Asset forfeiture proceedings began immediately. The government seized grandmother's house, the site of so many horrors. Bank accounts frozen pending investigation of money laundering charges. The family's financial structure, built on exploitation, crumbled within weeks. Relatives who depended on the income faced their own reckonings with poverty. I moved into a studio apartment near the domestic violence shelter where I'd found work. The night shifts allowed me to attend community college during the day, working toward a social work degree. My supervisor, herself a survivor, understood when I needed breaks during particularly difficult intake interviews. The work felt like penance and purpose combined. Group therapy with my cousins happened every Saturday morning. We sat in a circle in a cheerful room with painted butterflies on the walls, learning words for what had happened to us. The therapist guided us through exercises about body autonomy, healthy relationships, breaking shame cycles. Progress came slowly, measured in small victories like Mira raising her hand to speak. The civil lawsuit against the estate proceeded parallel to criminal cases. Lawyers worked pro bono, seeking damages for the victims. Whatever money recovered would go into trust funds for the children's education and therapy. The legal process would take years, but it established official recognition of harm done, compensation owed, justice sought through every available channel. My father's health deteriorated without grandmother's financial support. Medicare covered basic dialysis, but not the supplemental treatments he needed. I picked up extra shifts, contributed what I could, watched him fade despite our efforts. He died 6 months after testifying, finally free from the devil's bargain that had kept him alive but complicit. His funeral was small, attended only by those who'd chosen truth over family. The domestic violence shelter expanded their programming after our case. They developed specific protocols for familial trafficking, trained staff on generational abuse patterns, created support groups for survivors of interfamily exploitation. My story became a teaching tool, anonymized but powerful, helping other counselors recognize similar patterns. Other victims began coming forward. Inspired by our prosecutions, families in neighboring counties reported similar systems. The state attorney general's office opened a task force investigating organized familial abuse. Our case became a template, showing how financial evidence could prove what testimony alone couldn't establish. The investigation would continue for years. I testified at grandmother's parole hearing hearing after 3 years. I spoke about the ongoing damage, the cousins still in therapy, the family members who'd never recovered, but I also acknowledged her own victimization, the cycle she'd inherited and perpetuated. I asked the board to require extensive psychiatric treatment as a condition of any release. They denied parole but mandated mental health evaluation. The shelter promoted me to overnight supervisor. I trained new volunteers, developed intake protocols, supervised the crisis hotline. My own story informed my work without defining it. I learned to recognize the signs I'd missed in my own family. The control disguised as love, the exploitation wrapped in tradition, the silence enforced through financial dependence. Madhu graduated high school despite everything. I attended her ceremony, watched her walk across the stage in cap and gown, remembered the broken girl in the hospital bed. She planned to study psychology, wanting to understand what had happened to us all. Her acceptance letter to State University felt like victory against everyone who'd tried to destroy her future. The house where I'd grown up was demolished. The new owners, unaware of its history, built a modern duplex on the lot. I drove past occasionally, watching construction progress, seeing physical erasure of our painful history. The shed where we'd gathered to find our voices became a garage. The kitchen where everything exploded transformed into someone else's breakfast nook. 5 years after that birthday party, I stood in a courthouse again, this time as a guardian ad litem, advocating for children caught in custody disputes. My supervisor had recommended me for the training, saying my background gave me unique insight. I accepted the responsibility knowing every case would echo my own family's destruction. Alicia aged out of foster care on her 18th birthday. I helped her move into transitional housing, apply for community college, access therapy services. She decided to study early childhood education, wanting to be the teacher who noticed warning signs. We unpacked her few belongings in silence, both remembering the little girl with bruised arms who needed protection. The investigation's ripple effects continued spreading. Families I'd never heard of faced scrutiny as financial patterns emerged. Banks implemented new reporting requirements for suspicious transfers involving minors. Schools developed better training for recognizing trafficking indicators. Small changes accumulated, creating barriers against future exploitation. Some relatives maintained grandmother's innocence despite convictions. They sent letters calling me a family destroyer, blaming me for poverty and separation. I stopped reading them after the first year, forwarding them unopened to my lawyer for documentation. Their anger felt small compared to the freedom we'd gained through truth. The monthly support group met in the basement of a community center. Survivors of familial abuse gathered to share experiences and coping strategies. I facilitated discussions, provided resources, connected people with services. My cousins attended when they could, their presence reminding me why the fight had been necessary. Sunita started college with a full scholarship from the Victim Compensation Fund. Mira entered high school with confidence I'd never imagined possible. The younger ones progressed through therapy, learning to trust adults again. We'd saved them from the system if not from its effects. Breaking generational trauma required destroying the family that perpetuated it. Some chains had to be shattered regardless of cost.